As big as it gets, Rachel Reeves will bring us Labour's first budget in 15 years. So who will win and who will lose? There'll be huge tax rises and a squeeze on some spending, but schools and hospitals look set to cash in. And as if by magic, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is with us here in the studio this morning. It's a huge week for what is still quite a new government, isn't it?
It is a big week because this is about how we fix the foundations of our economy and how we deliver the change that people voted for in July. And there's no better place to start than education and our children's life chances.
You feeling the pressure?
We all do. These are big decisions, big responsibility, but people will see the change they voted for.
OK, we'll talk to you later in the show. And it's a big week for the Tories as well. The closing days of the leadership contest between these two. Andrew Griffith, the current Shadow Science Secretary, is here as the Tories prepare to respond to a budget for the first time as the opposition in a generation. And it's as big as it gets across the Atlantic. Just 9 days to go till the election. We'll hear our North America editor's verdict on this week. And it's Sunday, so there is some stardust. Steve Coogan has been telling me how Alan Partridge might handle hosting a Sunday morning show.
As a white, older than middle-aged man, he would be desperate to be relevant in any way, shape or form. A bit like Keir Starmer, he'd see which way the media wind was blowing and go that way.
Welcome to you and welcome to our team at the desk for the next 16 minutes. We have with us Baroness Amos, former Cabinet Minister and diplomat, top economist Andy Haldane, and Sir Rocco Forte, well-known hotelier and businessman. A warm welcome to you three. Let's start with the headlines on this busy weekend. The budget dominates, as you'd expect. Rachel Reeves telling The Observer her statement on Wednesday will match the greatest moments in Labour's history. The Sunday Telegraph claims that businesses have already started to shut up shop, and the Mail on Sunday is warning of tax hikes to come. The Independent chooses foreign news, splashing with the warning from the White House and the West to Iran not to retaliate after Israel's revenge strikes. But the tabloids choose a couple of royal stories. Prince William says his mother inspired his campaign against homelessness, and the Sunday Express says King Charles is expected to return to a normal travel schedule after the Commonwealth Summit on the other side of the world lifted his spirits. Let's start, though, here with this studio in the budget. Now, Andy, maybe the biggest thing about the budget has already happened. The Chancellor has told us all that she's changing the way that the government calculates its debt and borrowing. And she credited you as one of the people who changed her mind. And in fact, it was in that seat that you said she should do it a few months ago. What do you think the change is going to be and why does it matter so much?
I mean, the key change is around the rule for debt and recognising that when spending takes place for investment, that is creating an asset as well as a liability. And that opens up some headroom for the government to do the right thing, just to invest big across our public services.
So in layman's terms, if a government borrows money to spend it on good stuff, that doesn't get counted against them.
That's right. That counts as an asset, not as a liability. And that's just what we need, because the investment is the absolute foundation stone for growth.
Sir Rocco, you're at the other end of the political spectrum, but interestingly, when you were on Together before, you thought also there should be a change in the way that the government does it.
I'm not sure we are necessarily at the other end of the political spectrum. But yes, but I mean, it depends what that money is spent on and how it's spent. And is it money going to be spent effectively and show a return? The reality, when Labour first came in, they stopped a lot of infrastructure projects which the Conservatives had set in train, on schools, on hospitals and things like that, which was actually good investment. But the other aspect of it is they're raising taxes hugely. The government, at the end of the day, can't create growth and wealth. Can create a bit of growth in the short term, but can't create wealth for the country. If you go back to 2000, the private sector represented 2/3 of the economy. Today it represents 50%. and government is taking more and more. We're getting much closer to the situation in the European Union, which has seen no growth for a large number of years now.
Lots to get stuck into then on the economic and business side of the budget. But to you, Baroness Amos, from a political point of view, you were a minister in the new Labour era. How much pressure do you think this new government is under to get it right this week?
It's huge. I mean, I'm really glad that the Chancellor took her time to understand the legacy that she was left so that she could really think about what she needed to put into her budget so that the things that are right at the top of the government's agenda in terms of health, education, the importance of investment and growth, that she's able to talk about those and that they're in the central part of the budget. But at the same time, I know how really difficult it is to make decisions, which means that you have to cut back on certain things. We saw it with the winter fuel allowance. There will be other things that she will not be able to fund. This is not what those ministers went into government for, but if they don't take the tough decisions now, the foundations will not be set for a better future. And that's the important thing at this moment.
So it's a real tightrope to walk for
Absolutely.
this new government. So let's get to it then. Only 3 days to go. And we do know a lot about what's to come in the shape of big tax rises, those changes to how the government does its sums, and, as we were just hearing, a squeeze on some bits of government spending, which can be politically difficult. The purpose, we're told, is threefold: to fill in the fabled black hole in the government's wallet, to escape the doom loop of low growth, and, as the Chancellor hinted to us a few months ago, if there was money to spend, to put it not just into health, but into education, top of her personal list.
Well, look, I want taxes on working people to be lower, but you've always got to explain where the money comes from for that. But look, the thing that got me into politics in the first place was education and schools.
Well, that was good news, perhaps, for Bridget Phillipson, who's now in charge of England's schools. We know that the budget is going to be of enormous scale. We know your department is going to get some more for schools. But to some of our viewers, it might sound a bit like you're going back to traditional Labour, borrow more, spend more, tax more.
No, we've seen Rachel Reeves set out the clear fiscal rules that where it comes to day-to-day spending, we want to make sure there is stability there. But where it comes to investing in the long-term prosperity of our country, this is a budget that will fix the foundations, but will also make sure that we invest in our schools, for example. There can be no more important place to start than education where it comes to those foundations. And we know that so much in children's lives is determined through the education system. Now, that starts in the early years, and that's why early years education is my #1 priority, because too many of our children arrive at school and they're not where they need to be. But right throughout their lives, I'm determined as Education Secretary to break that link between background and success. And that's why I'm also really pleased that alongside the investment we're setting out around the school rebuilding programme, we're also making commitments to provide additional support to our most vulnerable children. So children going through the social care system, for example, extra help for fostering and for kinship carers.
And we're going to talk later in our time together about some of the specifics in your brief. But let's just stick with the budget for now. We know there's going to be a hike in employers' national insurance contributions. And Rachel Reeves confirmed that doesn't fall under her definition of a tax on working people. Why are people who run businesses not working people?
What we set out in our manifesto was that we would not increase VAT, national insurance or income tax on working people. And coming out of this budget, working people will not see higher taxes in the pay slips that they receive. That is really important because we know the pressures that people are under. On other measures in the budget, other tax measures, you'll have to wait to ask directly Rachel Reeves when she is here. And I can't you'll appreciate, the Sunday ahead of the budget, I can't speculate on precise tax measures.
This isn't speculating. I'm asking a question of principle. Why are people who run businesses not working people under the Chancellor's own definition?
Because our manifesto is all about VAT, national insurance and income tax on people whose main source of income is the income that they earn from going out to work.
Well, that's not really what your manifesto said, actually. Your manifesto said repeatedly, in fact, here's a quote here from Rachel Reeves. You've read it. It says in black and white, we won't increase national insurance, income tax and VAT. So I'll ask you again, why are people who run businesses not working people in this government's eyes?
As I say, our manifesto was very clear about who we were talking about and what we meant. Wider measures, other spending and taxation measures within the budget, you'll appreciate the Chancellor will set all of those out And it's more than my job is worth to come on your programme and announce ahead of time what might or might not be in a budget.
But I'm not, Secretary of State, asking you about the decisions on Wednesday. I'm asking you what you mean as a government, what you meant in your manifesto by working people. The definition of this is incredibly important because you're using it as the foundation for how you make decisions about people's pay slips, people's income. So how do you define a working person?
Well, you are inviting me to speculate by the nature of the question that you're asking. What I'm saying is that after the budget, when people look at their pay slips, they will not see higher taxes. I think that's a very clear commitment about why we are making sure that we recognise the importance of getting that right, because working people have faced higher taxes year after year under the Conservatives. We face some really tough choices, because not just that in-year £22 billion black hole that we faced, but the longer-term direction of our country, the terrible growth that we've seen in recent years. We are determined to turn that around, and all of the work that I'm leading around skills is a crucial part of how we back businesses, how we get growth back, and how over time that allows us to invest more in our public services to break that doom loop that you described of ever higher taxes on working people and lower growth.
But forgive me, I'm not asking you about the details of the budget. I'm asking you what Labour means by a working person. Now, the Prime Minister's given one definition.
By logical
I'm asking you what you mean by a working person.
A working person is someone who derives their main income from going out to work. And coming out of this budget, people in that category will not see higher taxes on their payslip.
So, as a Cabinet Minister, you're entitled to a total salary of more than £160,000. Are you a working person?
My income derives from my job, and I'll pay whatever taxes are required of me.
But so you are a working person because your income comes from your main job and you're salaried in that way. Is a small business owner whose average net profit last year might have been £13,000, that's the average, are they not a working person?
Look, we can go through a range of different hypotheticals about who may or may not be captured by tax measures that may or may not happen in the budget.
You'll
be able to ask, when Rachel sat here next weekend, you can ask her about the precise measures that she has announced. I know it's frustrating ahead of a budget that I can talk about some areas but not all of it. But what I'm clear about is when people are after the budget, when they look at their pay slip that they receive, what they will see is a Labour government that has prioritised making sure they do not see higher taxes, because we know for 14 years we've been going in the wrong direction.
But many people who run businesses may well see their taxes going up. People who are not wealthy but might maybe get their income from having a couple of rental flats that they might have scrimped and saved to buy. People who earn their income in different ways, not from being a salaried member of staff, may see their taxes going up. And I'm not asking you to tell us what's in the budget.
You are asking me to speculate because that's hypothetical. Next weekend, after the budget, when Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is sat here, you can cover all of that. What I can say to you today, the clear direction that we have set out as a government is that we hold to our manifesto commitments not to increase VAT, national insurance or income tax on working people, and they will see that after the budget. Other measures, tax and spending, matters for the Chancellor, I'm afraid.
I'm going to try one more time. Is the owner of a small business a working person?
We can keep going around this loop, and I appreciate your frustration. I would love to come and say, here's all the measures, line by line. That's not my job, however, that's for the Chancellor. She'll address every question.
I think it's our viewers who will be frustrated.
Well, they haven't, I can get that, and they haven't got long to wait. The budget's on Wednesday, and the Chancellor can address that with you directly.
Okay, but do you accept that what is running through Labour's programme here in terms of economics, that you are making a distinction between what people earn and how people earn it? That's what is running through this right now. You are shifting things so that people who get pay slips, who get salaries, are treated differently to people who make their money and pay their bills another way. Do you accept that at the very least?
Yeah, we are looking at how we make sure that there are fair choices across the board. That is what Rachel Reeves is considering. But these are tough choices, very difficult choices. And this does, I'm afraid, take us back to the inheritance of this government. £22 billion black hole, major challenges, whether it's in our hospitals, our schools, our police, you name it, challenges right across our public services. But what we have done as a government right from the start is make a different set of choices about what we prioritise. So in education, for example, the last government were presented with the Teachers' Pay Award. They got that report, they put it in a drawer, they walked away and they called an election. They left us that choice to make. We decided that our teachers deserved a pay award. We were able to do that. But that has meant difficult choices across government in order to do it. But that is the difference that you will see with the Labour government, that your viewers will see, how we prioritise health and education and make sure that we do fix those foundations of our country, because for too long we've been held back. And the choice at this budget is around investment or decline. And the change to the fiscal rules, what I'm setting out today around committing to our school rebuilding programme, is that this Labour government chooses investment.
Well, let's then come to your job. As you said, the Chancellor herself will be here next week, but viewers will also notice that on a question of principle about whether a small business person is a working person, when you've said as a member of the Cabinet you are a working person, people will notice that and perhaps remark that that's something, as you said yourself, might be frustrating to them. But let's talk about the Department for Education, where you're responsible for schools and also children's social care, which you alluded to. And as we did with the Health Secretary last week, we want to try and have a progress check on some of the things that you promised. So when will you be able to keep your promise to have 6,500 more teachers in England?
So we've already got that work underway. The pay award that I just talked about, I think, is a really important demonstration of how we value and respect our teaching workforce, because they are absolutely crucial to our children's life chances. So that work's already underway.
So when will you have them?
So this is over the course of the Parliament that we make this commitment. We started that work. The pay award is crucial. But I know for lots of teachers who'll be watching this morning, pay is important, of course it is, but it's about the wider terms and conditions and the pressures that they're under. And that's why I have asked for greater consideration to be given to more flexibility. We see lots of women in their 30s and 40s, for example, leaving teaching because they find it hard to combine work and family life. But there's much more besides. It's about the wider pressures our schools are under, and that's the job of government, to take action on those areas like child poverty, like mental health, that actually teachers say has a big impact.
But when it comes to that target, I think you said there is people are going to have to wait till 2029. You said to the end of the Parliament. So is that the target? People are going to have to wait till 2029 to get those 6,500 extra teachers that you promised in the election?
No, we've already, as I say, that work has already begun.
By when will you keep that promise?
As with our other commitments in our manifesto, they are for the duration of the Parliament. So, but that work is underway. It's urgent. It's absolutely urgent, because we've got too many children who do not have specialist teachers at the front of their classroom. Colleagues are having to step in to cover them. But where it comes to maths and science, for example, especially in communities, disadvantaged communities, they're most badly affected by those lack of subject specialists.
But it might take 5 years. OK. This month, on a different issue, you said that the parents of kids with special educational needs should be patient. Now, we know from our viewers, a lot of them will actually believe that they've been pushed way beyond their patience already. There was an absolutely scathing official report this week about the state of special education. Can you tell people watching who are affected by this, who really struggle, when you will come forward with a big plan to sort it out? I know you started a few things, but when can they expect to see the red meat of how you propose to fix this?
So the message I would give to parents watching this morning is, I completely understand the frustration that they feel. The system that we've inherited has been, pushed to the edge by the Conservatives. It's not a system that is working. It is not a system that is delivering good outcomes for our children.
Is it fit for purpose?
It's not working. It just isn't working. And what you will see in this budget is that education priorities have been protected. But what that report also made clear, the report from the National Audit Office, was that we are spending more as a country, but we are not getting good outcomes for children with special educational needs and disabilities.
So when will you have a plan? Because that's what people want to know. They want to be able to hold you to what your plans actually are. When will they see your plan?
I understand that people want to see action as quickly as possible. That's why I have taken steps to invest in more early speech and language support within our primary schools, why we've launched the curriculum and assessment review in terms of what our children are taught at school. But the wider system overall, of course, I want to work as quickly as I can to set out a plan for change and for reform. And I do urge patience, because whilst I recognise that for lots of parents, the system and children, the system just isn't working at the moment. If we are to embark on a bigger programme of reform, and I do believe that is essential, then I think it's also crucial that we get it right. And that's why I've already begun that process of listening to parents, to children, to staff, visited lots of schools that are already doing really great work around more specialist provision within mainstream schools as well.
Okay. Well, some families with kids of special needs pay off their own back for their kids to go to private schools because they believe they can't get what they need in the state sector. We know that military families are going to be protected in some way or another by private schools being charged VAT. Will you bring in the same protections for parents of children with special needs?
So where children are educated at a private institution because of an education, health and care plan, then there'll be no change there.
That's a different thing. That's where the local council is paying on their behalf.
Because that's where a need has been determined through that process. But that is, we have to draw the line, and that is where we draw the line.
So for parents who feel it's their only option, and they're using their own money to send their child who's struggling to a private school, they will have to pay the extra if their school chooses to charge the extra VAT.
That, of course, is the key point as to whether that is passed on, and private schools do have choices. The commitment I give to all parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities is that I absolutely understand the need for reform. I know how desperately let down they feel by a system that isn't delivering, and I will deliver a better state sector for children to make sure that there is more specialist support within mainstream settings. That is a crucial part of it, and there are brilliant examples around the country of where that can be done. But you won't tell them by
when they're going to do it. And forgive me, I think a lot of viewers get very frustrated when they hear politicians say, I take this really, 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 really seriously. And then when we say, well, by when will you even give them a plan, not even make it happen, and then you won't give a date?
I get that, but this is really complex. It is a really complex area. And, you know, we had a big reform under the Conservatives in 2014. It hasn't worked.
Okay.
So I want to move at pace, but we have to get it right. I think the last thing that your viewers, parents of children with SEND, would want was for that to not be in the right direction.
Great. When you're ready with it, come back and we can talk about it at length. I know our viewers care about this. People have also been horrified this week by the details emerging in the case of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, who was killed. Now, there is a criminal case ongoing, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but we do know that teachers had spotted bruises on her, that she was known to social services. Do you agree that there has been a terrible failure in safeguarding here?
So you'll appreciate I wouldn't want to comment on a specific case. I think right across the board, there are big challenges where it comes to safeguarding, and that's why in this budget, we will be doing more to put in place support around children's social care, but this cannot, for example, around fostering and kinship, but this cannot be the extent of it, because like the system for children with special educational needs, the children's social care system just isn't working. I mean, that's in a much wider sense. But where it comes to making sure schools and teachers have got what they need as well to identify what's happening, there is also a question increasingly of visibility of children. So whether we know where they are and what's happening in their lives. And that's why we will legislate for a register of children not in school, because you know, there are real worries there about that lack of visibility and knowing where children are and knowing whether they're safe.
But these cases sadly come up time and time again, whether it's Arthur Labinho Hughes, 1-year-old Star Hobson, children who were terribly let down. Is it your belief that social services ought to be more proactive, perhaps even to remove children from risky situations more quickly?
There are difficult decisions, and of course there are sadly many occasions where social workers working on behalf of government, the state, have to step in to make sure that children are protected. And sadly, as you say, we have seen and continue to see terrible, terrible cases of that kind. What I do think needs to happen, though, alongside that, and there will always be cases where the state has to step in, we need to do a lot more when our children are younger, and we need to put in much more support around families, because sometimes problems do escalate and the situation does get worse. And we have seen a steady erosion of that family support services. That it will take us time. You know, I would love to go faster on some of this. I absolutely would. But there is lots that we can do right now, and I think recruitment of social workers too. We've got really big gaps across the country, and that is a part of it.
And there are a couple of other things I want to fit in, but just very, very briefly, the previous government was considering giving schools a power called being a legal safeguarding partner, so they have more responsibility for protecting children. Would you consider that?
We are bringing forward a children's wellbeing bill that will look at a range of issues, and we're considering this.
And another thing the Children's Commissioner for England has said recently is that England should follow Scotland and Wales by banning smacking. And your department said it's considering it. Do you think that should happen? Is it a good idea?
We are considering it, but this is not an area where we intend to bring forward legislation anytime soon.
But is it your view that it's a good idea?
Over the years, I think I'd be keen to hear from the Children's Commissioner and from others about how this would work. I'm open-minded on it. It's not something we intend to legislate on, but I think we do need to look at how we keep children safe. The measures that we'll be setting out in the Children's Wellbeing Bill, which we're bringing forward by the end of the year, I would hope, will address many of those issues around children's social care, around keeping children safe. So there's a lot that we can get on and do now. I think having a conversation about that wider issue is something that we would need to take time and care in order to get it right.
OK, and just lastly, on a completely different issue, a video emerged yesterday appearing to show one of your fellow Labour MPs, Mike Amesbury, shouting and swearing at a man lying on a pavement during what seems like a pretty terrible disturbance in Cheshire. The police are looking into reports of an assault. Are Labour going to suspend the whip from him while they work out what happened?
So Mike Amesbury has himself gone forward to the police. The police are now investigating the matter. I think that's important. They're allowed to get on and do their job, and there's not much more I can say at this point.
But should he be suspended, at least while this is sorted out? Because if something like that happened, do you really want someone who's involved in that sitting on the Labour benches? Is it not better to suspend him while they figure out get to the bottom of it?
Mike Amesbury is cooperating fully with the police. He's gone forward himself to the police, and it is right that the police now look into this matter, investigate and decide what action, if any, is required. OK, Secretary of State Bridget Phillipson, great to have you with us in the studio as ever. Thank you very much indeed for answering most of our questions this morning. Great to have you on a big week. Well, let us know what you think. Email us at kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag that's on the screen there, or you can get in touch with us now on WhatsApp, which is 08000 28 21 61. That's 08000 28 21 61. I think I got that right. It's almost seared in my memory. And we'll try and share some of the conversation and your comments later in the show. Well, Andy, let's talk then about the budget and the economics. So I think Bridget Phillipson did sort of acknowledge that they are moving from taxing assets, shares, profits, away from taxing people who are on salaries. But what do you make of how she explained the approach?
This distinction between working people and not makes no real sense, I think. So there's absolutely a case for thinking we might tax rich people more than poor. We do already. Do that a bit more if we wanted. But the distinction being used, I think, is a difficult one. The truth is, it's very unlikely, Laura, over the course of this Parliament, that we won't almost all be paying a bit more tax to close that gap, whether we call ourselves working people or not, and that is just the reality of the situation.
Valerie, how have the government got themselves into a situation where a cabinet minister sits and says she's a working person on more than £160,000 a year, but then won't say if somebody with a small business with a profit of £23,000 is a working person? I mean, as Andy says, it's a bit of a pickle they've got themselves in, isn't it?
I think the problem is getting into these narrower and narrower definitions.
It was their phrase, though. They chose the phrase in the election campaign.
I completely accept that, but I think, getting into narrower and narrower definitions becomes unhelpful. At a certain point in time. I think the government was trying to be very clear in the run-up to the election that we will not raise certain kinds of taxes, meaning that the rest remain open. And in doing that, obviously under interrogation, these issues are of, well, who do you mean, who do you really mean, become more challenging. We haven't got long to wait now to see what the Chancellor is going to say. So let's wait and see.
But what do you make of what you've heard so far? Because we do know a lot, and there is always the normal sort of coyness on the few days before, but we know a lot. What do you make of what you've seen?
So, I'm somebody who, personally, I'm single. I'm very happy to pay my taxes. I'm very happy to pay more because I believe in an investment in social sectors like health and education. I also want to see that those who are poorer in our society, that they are assisted by a government that understands that we need to do more to support those people. These are not headlines that people love. The majority of people don't necessarily want to pay more tax. I think the government is, given what they have inherited, they're in a difficult position. I think that they are handling that position as well as they can. And that's why I was so pleased that the Chancellor took her time to actually understand what she had inherited.
Rocco, what do you think the impact of more tax on business would be? You know, we're pretty sure that they are going to whack up employers' national insurance.
Bridget said that working people wouldn't pay higher taxes. Everybody's going to pay higher taxes because the thresholds have been frozen, and that has been extended a further number of years. So a lot of people come into the higher rates of tax very quickly over the next few years. If you want, it's an ideological approach. I mean, Labour thinks that government can do everything, that by government spending money, it's going to get the economy going, and so on. There are ways in government can spend money, and in the deprived areas of the country, you need to create the incentives for businesses to start up. But it's the private sector that creates the wealth, and that's what always is forgotten. It's been forgotten in Europe for years, and that's why Europe has stagnated for a long period of time. We're going to see the same thing here.
Well, are we?
We were starting to see some growth in the economy, and that was immediately stopped with all this nonsense that's been talked about since Labour arrived.
But I don't understand why it's either or. Why can't we have both? Why can't we have investment from the private sector as well as government expenditure in areas which are important for growth and development of the country? Why is it always posed as either or?
It isn't. But if government is spending a huge proportion of money, then it's taking money away from the private sector. It's disincentivizing the private sector from investing. Higher taxation does that. And doesn't encourage foreign businesses to come into the country, or foreigners to come into the country. Putting VAT on private schools is a completely ideological thing. It's not going to raise. A lot of people are going to go from private schools into the public sector schools. That's going to cost money, which we haven't got. We should be incentivising people to go to private schools.
I mean, there's lots of reporting around, and particularly in some of the more right-wing papers, that actually wealthy people are already packing up and leaving the UK. Is that true? Do you know wealthy people who've already gone off? You do?
Huge numbers. Already sort of 9,500 have left already, according to several surveys that are made. I spent a lot of time in Italy. A lot of Italians were coming to England. They're not coming in. They're all leaving England now.
So, Andy, what is your take then on this debate? Because we've heard it from both sides, from the Labour side and then from somebody who's a successful businessman. Since this government has been in charge, and with all the cues and hints that have been, what has actually happened in the economy that you can pin on them?
Well, I mean, the truth is, if you ask business, what do you need to make Britain a good place to do business? They will tell you improved schools, improved hospitals, improved roads, cheaper energy. So if the investment, the extra 20, 30 billion that has been mooted from the budget, is invested in those things, that is not crowding out private investment. That is crowding it in. It's responding to what business itself is telling us is needed to top up the investment the public sector provides from the business sector. And that, for me, is the absolute key to get growth going.
But is what you've seen so far a credible way to do it?
I think in the land of hard choices.
That doesn't sound like a very fun place.
Well, listen, it was always going to be a bittersweet budget. And the bitter bit is the tax pill, which will be big. And the sweet part is the investment part. And the key for Rachel on Wednesday is that the aftertaste is a sweet one. In other words, it's seen as being go-growth and pro-business. If that's what emerges through the investment route, then I think that's good news.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, Laura. Undoubtedly, it's going to be hard. I've been in government. I've seen the kinds of difficult choices that you have to make. I've seen, as a cabinet minister, speaking to your colleague, the Chancellor, and basically saying, these are the kinds of investments I would like to make in the area that I control. But it has to be a collective cross-government commitment in the longer term. And we all know that what this government inherited was not pretty, that what the Chancellor has to do on Wednesday is extraordinarily difficult. But taking the pain now to try to lay the right kind of path for the future is really, really important.
It's hard
for
to
all
overestimate actually how big a week it is. But Rocco, someone said to me it's the equivalent of her trying to land a passenger jet on a postage stamp, right? This is a nightmare for any chancellor
Yes, but
to
I mean,
pull off.
the reality is this whole thing is about the inheritance has completely been overblown. This black hole of 22 billion has suddenly become 40. The Treasury hasn't opined on any of it. It hasn't worked out the figures yet as how those 22 billion was arrived at. This propaganda has been created to raise taxes because that's what Labour wants. They want to spend more and more money and people's hard-earned money in areas which, like the National Health Service, the Conservatives have poured money into the National Health Service and productivity has gone down. An unreformed National Service, the more money you pour into it, the more it will eat. Actually, with education, there's one thing the Conservatives have done reasonably well. The Michael Gove, when he first became education, drove the academy programme, which was a Labour idea, and very effectively expanded the academy system. The taking on of failing schools by successful academies and so on has actually generally improved education. Ofsted has been very thorough in its reports on schools and driving standards forward.
Our viewers care about education
so
too.
that needs to be built on. It doesn't need to be changed altogether.
And just before we move on, I must ask you also about the Commonwealth Summit this week, because you know these countries well. You're High Commissioner to Australia.
I'm going to answer that, but I am not going to let Rocco get away with basically saying that these are figures that have been created out of nothing. It is not true. We all know that that is not true. These are figures that have been agreed, outside of...
And you're talking about the 22 billion. And we will see...
The figures before OBR published all the figures.
The 22...
Very clear.
Could you let me finish? Can you let me finish, Rocco?
No.
You had your turn. And the other thing in relation to this is that the Health Secretary has made it absolutely clear that reform is at the top of his agenda as well as investment.
Indeed, turning
to the Commonwealth heads of
government. So the Prime Minister, it looks like he flies to the other side of the world and walks straight into what might have been quite a predictable and sensitive and difficult row about reparations. And we are short on time, so it's unfair to ask you to give a brief answer on such a complicated issue. But Keir Starmer did look a bit lonely at that big summit on the other side of the world, didn't he?
Look, this is an issue that is not going to go away. It's very important for the countries of the Caribbean, and it is very important for Britain. One of the reasons that it's not going to go away is because we as a nation will not deal with the deep legacy of a very dark past. So we find it hard to understand the importance of saying sorry for the transatlantic slave trade, the damage that did to countries in the Caribbean and the people who come from those countries. We get incredibly hung up on this word reparations, which is so toxic because it means different things to different people. And, the tabloids in particular will have lots and lots of numbers against it.
The Prime Minister's the one who said he wouldn't talk about it. Should he have just said sorry?
I have spoken to Caribbean leaders. They are interested in the fact that they have countries which need investment in areas like health and education, in skills, and I hope that what we will see is a dialogue between Britain and CARICOM which gets us to a point where we have better understanding of the importance of that dark period of our history and how we can move forward together.
OK, well, we will see. It didn't look like it quite went that well with Keir Starmer this week.
But if you look at what actually came out of CHOGM, it is a commitment to that dialogue, and I think that's important.
OK, well, all three of you, thank you very much indeed for that lively debate, as always we like on a Sunday morning. Now then, it is the last week of Rishi Sunak's leadership of the Conservative Party. Remember him?
He was the UK's first
He
British
is off after just over 2 years in charge following Liz Truss's explosion in government. 2 years when such a lot has happened. Rishi Sunak will be replaced by either Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick. There they are. And next Sunday, whoever the winner is expected to come and join us here in the studio. But today, I'm pleased to say we've got Andrew Griffith, who's currently the Shadow Secretary of State for Science. Who knows what you'll be next week when there's a new leader, but you're very welcome to the studio this morning. Now, we've been talking about how the government's changing the rules around borrowing. Andy Haldane's backed it. The IMF, the big influential international financial institution, seems to be up for it. Are they right to do it?
No, and the way in which this is being done is wholly wrong. If there's a debate to be had at all about the fiscal rules, it shouldn't be in the heat of the moment. It shouldn't be to make a public spending spree possible that wouldn't otherwise be. That should be something that we should do actually with a lot more parliamentary scrutiny. Even the announcement of this was briefed out and announced in Washington. But actually we have a real problem with the level of debt in this country. Part of the agenda now for us in opposition of renewal has to be how we have more scrutiny about that. You're about to see, a government come to office on the promise of no increase in taxation, no increase in borrowing. They're about to break all of those promises. National insurance, you put it to the Secretary of State directly, exactly what was in the words of the Labour manifesto, which anyone could look at. And Rachel Reeves herself said that she wasn't going to fiddle with those fiscal rules.
But just when it comes to the debt, Andrew Griffith, I mean, you've said that Labour shouldn't be doing it this way. They haven't had enough scrutiny. There hasn't been enough conversation. I mean, you were part of Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss's Treasury team when you did a mini budget without even talking to the OBR, the independent financial number crunchers, about it. You rammed it through and created complete chaos in the financial markets. So some of our viewers might think it's a bit rich for you trying to say Rachel Reeves doesn't have the right to do this.
Well, I was the minister that cleared up the LDI mess, which was a failure by many people in the system.
In the Treasury team.
I was the minister that cleared up the LDI mess after that budget, which clearly mistakes were made. Actually, if you look at what was happening there was a desire to try and protect people from the rising cost of energy and to reduce tax on workers and people who are creating wealth. Now, what we had last week was the government seeking to deliberately break or change the fiscal rules. No consultation with the OBR around that, Laura, and have broken their promise on energy. They never asked the OBR to look at things like the winter fuel allowance. That was a fiscal event, the first fiscal event they came up with, and they never asked the OBR to do that.
You didn't ask the OBR to look at £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts, which caused chaos in the markets. It led to the Prime Minister of the time, Liz Truss, being marched from office barely 40 days after moving in. So do you really think that the Conservatives are going to make much hay with trying to say that Labour ought not to do this because they haven't looked at it properly? They've got the backing of the IMF. They've had distinguished economists like Andy Haldane talking about this for months and months and months.
Well, they will have received the same advice that every Chancellor and Treasury Minister receives from the Treasury, which is that if you increase the level of public borrowing, and as a government, every working day, we're in the markets raising £1 billion of gilts. We exist, as it were, by the kindness of strangers who buy those. We will have, and this is what the Treasury analysis has always shown, higher interest rates for longer. That has a cost. Also, the cost that the government pays on that debt has a cost. We spend around £100 billion each year on debt. That's twice the defence budget. That is bigger than Bridget Phillipson's education budget, even after they try and spend more. So this is a real cost on people.
And the debt of the country is indeed absolutely enormous. But that was built up over more than 10 years of the Conservatives being in charge.
It's been built up. No, it's been built up over a generation, actually, Laura. The last year in which a British government balanced its books, and I'm not saying a government should balance its books every year because the economy goes up and down, but the last time a government presented a budget that would balance in year was in 2001 and 2000.
And the problem has been building for a long time, but the Conservatives were in power for a long time, during which the debt went up for all sorts of reasons. Some of it was emergency spending during the pandemic, and some of it was because of the energy shock, which came about from the war in Ukraine. But isn't there also a cost to not investing in public services? Isn't there also a cost to not finding money to put into the health service, to put into schools that are falling down, to put into things like social care that is causing such challenges for members of the public? Isn't there a cost to not doing that?
Well, there's a cost to everything in government. The world of government is about making hard choices. We presented a budget that did meet the fiscal rules, that did see the debt rise for a number of years, but in the out years see that debt reduce. Now, that was a function of hard choices that we were willing to make, looking for productivity increases on the public sector. So, yes, paying public servants more, but also expecting productivity just as the private sector's expected in return. A very significant amount of reform of welfare, because that's one of the biggest costs that's increasing. And of course, that interest cost, managing that well, making sure that markets have confidence and that we present prudent plans.
OK, and if you had to sum up Rishi Sunak's legacy as a leader, he took over after a traumatic time for the party and he left at a difficult time for the party when you got hammered in the election. In a sentence, if you can, how would you sum up his legacy?
Look, I think any government doesn't get everything right. I think if you look at the broad sweep of the government, the only government I was part of between 2019 and 2024, we navigated some of the most difficult challenges. Already after 110 days, I think people are seeing that this government came in on a false prospectus that things would be easy. They essentially lied to the British people in terms of their plans not to increase national insurance, not to go on a debt-fueled spree, not to change the fiscal rules. Yes, I do think that, Laura. I do think that at a time where we have a crisis of trust in politics, they've behaved, at the very least, like the worst form of dodgy car hire firm, conjuring up small print that never existed. And when the British people go back and say, you didn't say you were going to put up tax on working people, conjuring up all sorts of contrived ideas whereby a nurse with an ISA is teacher with a second home is somehow not a working person.
OK, we must leave it there. But Andrew Griffith, it's great to have you with us. Let's see what job you end up with after the new Tory leader's in place. But it's great to have you with us this morning, Andrew Griffith. Thank you very much indeed. Now, politics and satire are never far apart. Sometimes, frankly, it can be hard to tell the difference. But poking fun at danger is part of it too, not least in the Cold War movie classic Dr. Strangelove. Now, with the express permission of Stanley Kubrick's family, none other than Steve Coogan and Armando Iannucci have created a version for 2024, this time for the stage. And they reckon its observations about a mad American general who hits the nuclear button might be even more pertinent today. Last week on the show, we spoke to the Russian ambassador and we asked him about Putin's nuclear threats. And he said, we will protect our interests with all means at our disposal. I mean, do you feel that Dr. Strangelove is still actually a metaphor?
I know they sort of bang the drum a lot, and Putin does, and uses the notion of it to try and rattle the cage. I don't actually think he would do it. I think it's just a tactic for him. But I think what's more of it is sort of people get rogue elements getting their hands on it, or individuals. The idea of individuals having all this power to be able to change the world used to be a fantasy, and now it's a reality. There are a handful of individuals around the world who are not governments, aren't accountable, who do wield enough power to be able to, tip the world on its axis.
So for some of those audience then who don't know the story, who probably will have heard Dr. Strangelove, but they're not really sure what it's about, give us then the potted version.
It's about, as we know has actually happened, the potential for nuclear war happening because of a mistake, because of mechanisms and protocols and systems that are ultimately beyond our control. And with the advent of AI, that also is a new added threat to what might happen.
Armando, you told the New York Times recently that laughing at a nuclear disaster couldn't feel more apt right now, maybe even more apt than when the original emerged. Why did you say that?
It's, either you laugh or you scream, and you can do both, I suppose it's, these things seem intangible to us. It's very hard to process something that we know might happen and will be catastrophic, but hasn't happened yet. So trying to get your head around what that might be like without traumatizing yourself, one way of it is doing a comic version of it, but one that's got serious intent behind it.
And why was it you wanted to take this project on right now?
For me, it was like, yes, it was about, the prospect of nuclear destruction, but also these other Armageddons that we talk about, like climate change, like AI, like, there is an atmosphere of anxiety and a sense that we're not in charge anymore of our own fate. And the ones that are in charge might just get it wrong. Because here we are, NATO and a Russian president staring at each other and talking about nuclear weapons. So it's become both a kind of metaphor and literally opposite as well.
And Steve, in terms of your own involvement then on the stage every night and even in afternoon performances, I mean, you've outdone the original. Peter Sellers playing 3 of the characters, you're playing 4. Just as a piece of work to take on, what is that like?
Well, it's quite difficult, but it's also enjoyable and it's rewarding and it's sort of an opportunity and that mitigates the hard work. There's also a little bit of vanity, which is not so much that you want to say yes, but you find it very, very difficult to say no.
Because you're the guy that could do it.
Well, I thought if there's probably a handful of people who could do that. I thought, well, I've earned some of my stripes over the last 30 years, so I thought probably I'm in a good place to do it.
I mean, how would you have felt it was Rob Brydon?
Well, that's the other thing. The idea of Rob getting plaudits for it would just give me such indigestion that in the end I felt I had to do it just for that reason alone.
You've been prescient before about American politics, and you've spent time inhabiting the American political brain in a fictional sense, but sometimes American politics seems like fiction. What do you make of what's going on there at the moment?
Well, it's, I mean, it frightens me. It really does. I mean, Veep was made at a time when every story in Veep was about, Selina Meyer, the vice president, thinking she's done something wrong and then trying to make sure that that wasn't found out about or rowing back from it. But now, those rules don't apply anymore. I mean, we've seen Trump say he likes Hitler's generals. We're now hearing threats of people standing there with guns at the polling booths, almost intimidating people into not voting for Kamala Harris. And we've got people like Elon Musk who control not just their vast billions that can affect the way he gives £1 million a day to someone who will sign up to the campaign, but who controls information, who controls our news and how we get our news. And it's a frightening prospect.
And if you had to write a line for Kamala Harris in a speech what would it be?
Oh, well, it wouldn't be funny. It would be, this is it. This might be your last chance.
Steve, what do you make of what's going on in the States?
I agree with almost everything Armando said.
Almost, but not quite.
It is. It's beyond satire, I think, at the moment, and it would be funny if it wasn't real. But it's just the sort of dehumanisation of people by Donald Trump, even in his rhetoric, and people. What's worrying is people finding that acceptable. That kindness and generosity of spirit seems to have gone out of the window.
But many of our viewers will know you best for your huge years of success with Alan Partridge. I just wonder, as somebody who normally sits in my chair, how would Partridge approach a Sunday morning political interview programme?
He would, as a white, older than middle-aged man, he would be desperate to be relevant in any way, shape or form. So, a bit like Keir Starmer, he'd see which way the media wind was blowing and go that way. It's all about the career with Alan, so whatever's the best thing to say, a little bit of controversy, but not too much. And embracing all the new sort of diversity rules and protocols. He would wrap his arms around those just for his own survival.
Everybody always says they know someone like Alan, but nobody says I'm like Alan.
I'm like Alan. Yeah.
Nobody admits to that.
It's actually they're lying to themselves.
Yeah.
I think also seeing someone desperately trying to grapple to be on message and embrace the new protocols is funnier than just being a reactionary.
And what would Alan ask the first female Chancellor?
What would he ask the first female Chancellor?
How much money do we actually have?
He tried to be controversial.
Yes.
He'd say, okay, who's going to miss out? Who's going to miss? Ask them directly. Who is going to miss out on this budget? Because someone will. So who is it?
It's been great to speak to you both. Thank you.
Very good.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, let's stick with America then, because this week and next we're going to be checking in with the BBC's Sarah Smith with her verdict of the week.
Good morning, Laura. Now that we're into the final stretch of the campaign here in America, both candidates are pulling out all the star power that they can. Kamala Harris has had Bruce Springsteen and Beyoncé at rallies with her.
It's impossible not to feel the energy in this room.
Donald Trump is sat down to speak to probably the biggest podcast host in America, Joe Rogan.
I'm going to win Ohio by a lot. So that's one.
The polls suggest the race is still essentially tied, maybe with a slight advantage for Donald Trump, so they're both looking to reach every last voter that they can. Kamala Harris is issuing dark warnings about the dangers of re-electing Donald Trump.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
She's quoting his chief of staff, John Kelly, who said this week that he thinks Donald Trump does meet the definition of a fascist and would rule like a dictator. And Harris is trying to reach mostly college-educated women, people who don't normally vote Democrat, maybe are usually Republicans, don't love her policies, but maybe they could be persuaded to turn out and vote against Donald Trump.
We will win!
He is looking to reach the young men who don't normally vote but maybe could be persuaded to turn out for him. They've probably seen clips of him working in a branch of McDonald's on their social media feeds. And of course, this was also the week in which the Trump campaign complained that what they called the far left UK Labour Party was interfering in the election illegally because Labour volunteers were coming over here to work for the Harris campaign. Now, that complaint probably doesn't have any substance because none of those volunteers were actually being paid, but it doesn't bode particularly well for relations between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump if he is re-elected president in just 9 days' time.
Well, we'll hear from Sarah again next week, from Beyonce, Joe Rogan and Springsteen. Let's go to Valerie, Andy and Rocco. Valerie, you obviously are a senior figure in the Labour Party. There's been controversy between Labour and Trump this week, but you've been tipped to be the American ambassador to DC. You fancy it?
I know, and where did that come from? I mean, nobody's spoken to me about it.
Nobody's talked to you about it?
No.
Do you fancy it?
Nobody has spoken to me about it, Laura. I mean, it is total speculation. I have no idea where this has come from, and I'm not going to comment on speculation.
But would you like that job? You've done lots of big, important jobs.
I'm not going to comment on speculation, Laura.
OK. What about the election itself? What do you make of what's going on in DC?
So, I mean, I'm worried about several things. America is clearly extremely divided. There's whoever wins, there's going to have to be a huge amount of healing. I am not optimistic that that is going to be possible, given the divisions in the country. And, you know, given that I am so concerned about foreign policy and foreign affairs, I mean, I want a United States that is not isolationist, that it plays an active role on the international stage. We need America to do that. And that's what I want to see. Whoever wins, I want to see somebody who is going to work really hard to heal the country and to ensure that the US plays that important international role, which makes such a difference to all of us. And on this point about, you know, the relationship between the UK and the US, you know, the governments have to be pragmatic. I mean, it's always better if leaders get on, but regardless of whether leaders get on or not, the business of government continues.
And the drama of this election is, you know, profound day by day, Andy. But in terms of the economics, what's the difference between who wins? You know, you read these warnings, if Trump ends up back in the White House, it could be a trade war in China that plunges everyone into recession. How do you see the two different contenders in that context?
Yeah, I mean, if Trump makes good on what he said, economic policy-wise, which means tariffs, it means immigration restrictions, it means deportation, that means higher inflation in the US, it means lower growth in the US and probably higher interest rates in the US, and the rest of the world will catch a cold from that. So, you know, if you ask me, is Donald Trump a bigger threat to UK mortgage rates than Rachel Reeves? Of course he is. Because actually what Rachel's doing in a budget will be net good for growth and therefore net good for mortgage rates in a way that Trump would not be.
And Rocco, I think you want to expand your hotel empire into the States. Who would be better for you in that context?
I don't think, you know, if you look at the sort of past few years of presidents of the United States, it hasn't changed the American economy. The American economy has continued to grow effectively. There's a flexibility in the economy which surpasses whatever politician is in power and whichever party is in power. And I think America will continue to do that. If you think that America, 10 years ago, Europe was 26% of world GDP, today it's 17%. America was 26% then, and it still is. It still is, with the growth of China and India. So I think the American economy is actually beyond its politicians.
OK, very interesting. Maybe those all-powerful politicians aren't quite as powerful as they like to believe. All three of you, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And of course, thank you to my other guests as well. And most of all, as ever, to you for watching as big moments approach. After a shaky start, Labour has a huge chance this week to move on, to put the early wobbles to bed and to persuade you that its plan for prosperity and public services is credible. Wednesday's budget will set the terms for the party's success or failure and the country's fortunes. A prominent Labour Party figure told me this is it. Well, next Sunday, we will speak to the woman in charge of the budget, Rachel Reeves, and I'll look forward very much to seeing you then. Next Sunday, same time, same place.